For my mixed media animation, I took about 4 seconds of footage and printed out a contact sheet so that it was each frame. I drew on this. It was difficult to figure out how much or how little to draw on each frame compared to the last, because you don't really know how it's going to look when put together, so you just have to guess. I then scanned in the contact sheet. I opened After Effects and put this scan sheet in using a 1080 by 1920. I set this to 12 frames a second to preserve the best quality that I possibly could. After this, I scaled the image so that it would fit one frame on the screen at a time before setting a keyframe. I would then redo this using the position to move each keyframe so that each frame was then a keyframe, and then when you pressed play it would recreate the video in the right order. I then selected all the keyframes to turn on the hold keyframe. This would make all the frames freeze for a moment so that the video plays properly and doesn't feel too rushed. I'm really happy with the outcome of this. I think it plays really well and has a retro kind of feel to it. This is from the desaturation of being printed out and scanned in again, which would be quite hard to digitally recreate. I decided to trial some colour grading on a clip for my short film with the aim to make it look like a VHS analog horror style. This required a lot of grading as well as some overlay style edits. I started this in DaVinci Resolve by uploading the footage and doing an initial colour grade. I went to the Edit tab and cut up the footage into three sections, where the lighting was slightly different outside the door, in the room, and when somebody was on the screen. The initial colour grade was to give it a typical horror feel. I took the temperature down and turned it to make it a slight blue offset. This gave a cold and darker feel to the footage. I then applied an adjustment layer and went into the effects section to apply a video camera overlay, which then gave the impression that the footage was filmed on an old camcorder. I exported this footage and took it into After Effects to continue with the vintage look. I added a new adjustment layer and applied a noise effect, lowering the opacity and setting the blend mode to overlay to give a grainy old effect on the footage. I then added a solid colour overlay and added the Venetian blinds, which I then animated on the timeline and positioned keyframes to slowly move it down throughout the video. I then lowered the opacity once more and set this to overlay. I added a third adjustment layer and added the chromatic aberration effect. This slightly offset the RGB colours, and then in a final adjustment layer I included a vignette style to stylize the look further. I finally finished the colour grading footage by adding the brightness and saturation layer. I desaturated the footage to once again make it look old and worn. Overall I feel that this came out really well. It gives a pretty decent analog horror effect and gives me a strong base to work on for my film and to add audio. It did feel a bit confusing and messy with all the different layers, but I feel in the end it had a good result. For my 3D animation I added a sphere, and the explosion effect is the child of this layer. I upped the explosion a bit so that when I added a second sphere into the middle it would be easier for me to see and navigate, so I could put it as exact as possible, accounting for every angle. So I clicked the centre button of the mouse, which brings up every angle and helped me accurately place the centre sphere. I then keyframed in the explosion on the timeline to make it a smooth animation with the timing where I needed it to be. I added a lava effect to the middle sphere to give some difference between the two and make it easier to see than before. And then I added a melt effect as the child of this layer, before also keyframing in the animation for that. I had two big struggles here. Firstly, it was making the two animations line up. It was quite difficult to make sure that the melt effect didn't drop too early or too late. The second struggle was the 3D itself, making sure that the spheres fit perfectly with the added axis, whereas you'd only have to worry about one angle in 2D. I found it a rewarding challenge, however, as the final product looked pretty good. I think I could then take this concept further by adding lighting and sound effects if I was to ever do it again.